The chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel ballroom glowed like a galaxy caged in crystal. Each diamond facet caught the golden light and shattered into fragments that danced across silk gowns and polished tuxedos. Outside Manhattan surged with its usual restlessness, sirens, cabs, laughter rising from the streets. But inside these gilded walls, time seemed to pause, holding its breath for the spectacle about to unfold. Tonight was not simply a wedding. It was a coronation, a symphony of wealth, legacy, and precision so flawless it rivaled any opera staged across the city. White orchids cascaded from vases taller than children, violins lilted with melodies so delicate they seemed woven from moonlight, and champagne sparkled in the hands of those who ruled New York from glass towers and iron boardrooms. And yet beneath the shimmer, a tension hummed, invisible but sharp, as if the night itself knew it was dressed too beautifully to last. The ballroom doors opened tall and oak, creaking under the weight of anticipation. Conversations faltered. Heads turned in a synchronized ripple of curiosity. Ethan Walker entered first, followed by his younger twin by 7 minutes, Adrian. Together they commanded the room without a single word, identical in face, height, and bearing, yet worlds apart in essence. Ethan moved, as though the air itself parted for him. His dark blonde hair was swept neatly back the cut of his tuxedo, molded like armor to a man born to wear power. His steel-gray eyes flickered across the room, not as if he were seeing, but as if he were owning. The subtle incline of his chin, the unhurried rhythm of his stride, every gesture was a silent proclamation. This city belongs to me. Beside him, Adrian carried the same striking frame and symmetrical features. But where Ethan shone, Adrian smoldered. His movements were almost too exact, like a man perpetually on guard. His eyes, a stormier gray, did not dazzle, but unsettled, as though they could slice through layers of civility straight to a person's core. His silence was weightier than words, his presence edged with restraint rather than grandeur. Side by side, they were a living paradox, two halves of a whole, united by blood, yet divided by unspoken rifts. And tonight, the air between them was tight as wire. The next hush came when 2 women entered. Amara Johnson walked first, the elder of her twin, by only minutes. Her gown, ivory silk that flowed like whispered prayer, lent her an aura that hushed even the murmurs of the elite. She was not an ostentatious beauty. She was lingering beauty, the kind that quieted a room not with fire, but with stillness. Her eyes, dark and luminous, carried intelligence that never missed a detail, and a heart too soft for the world, yet too strong to bend. Behind her followed Ayla, brighter and bolder, a spark to Amara's flame. Her gown shimmered with threads of silver that caught the chandelier light, like starlight trapped in fabric. Her warm, daring smile had the kind of magnetism that made people lean closer without realizing. Yet tonight, as she stepped into the sea of silk and tuxedos, her smile trembled for the briefest flicker, betraying that even her fearless heart could sense the unease rippling beneath the elegance. The ballroom shifted as their paths intersected with the Walker twins. Amara's gaze met Adrian's, raw, electric, as if 2 guarded souls had recognized themselves in an instant of forbidden honesty, and neither smiled. Neither looked away. Ayla's eyes found Ethan. Her lips curved into a tentative smile, met by the faintest acknowledgement on his. For a breath, the lavish hall dissolved. Only the 2 of them were tethered by something silent, something unexplainable. It should have been perfect symmetry. Twin brothers, twin sisters, destiny stitching with deliberate precision. But fate's hand was never kind for long. Music swelled, filling every corner with an intoxicating rhythm. Couples floated onto the marble floor, gowns, sweeping shoes gliding as servers wove through the crowd with silver trays of champagne. Laughter chimed like bells, toasts rose in crystalline clinks, and the illusion of perfection tightened like a silken veil for most. but not for everyone. Near the marble columns, Ayla noticed him, a man utterly still in a sea of motion. His black suit was no rarity, but how he wore it rigid, purposeful, unraveled her ease. His face half-shadowed his eyes fixed on Ethan. Not a glance, not curiosity. An unyielding stare, cold and merciless. Ayla's laughter stuttered mid-sentence. She blinked, forcing herself to look away, only to find when her gaze returned that his eyes had not moved. They clung to Ethan like crosshairs. And then he was gone. She spun, scanning the room, but the space near the column stood empty. The crowd moved undisturbed, conversations, hummed violins, soared as if nothing had shifted. But Ayla's pulse raced, her skin prickling with the memory of that frost-laden gaze. A moment later, a waiter slid an ivory envelope onto Ethan's plate. No one noticed. No one except Adrian. Adrian's eyes narrowed, flicking to the envelope. For the first time that evening, his mask faltered. His face drained of color, and his grip on the glass trembled. Amara, seated across, caught it. She followed his gaze to the small envelope resting innocently against Ethan's untouched champagne flute. Her heart tightened with an intuition she could not name. Danger. The word was not spoken, but wrapped itself around her chest. She saw how Adrian's jaw clenched, how recognition, not confusion, darkened his eyes. He knew. Ethan, oblivious or too assured of his invincibility, remained animated, his voice low as he leaned toward Ayla. Their laughter sparked glances from nearby guests, his hand easily brushing hers. To him, the world remained intact. But Adrian noticed, and Amara noticed Adrian. For Amara, the night had already cracked. Every laugh sounded sharp, every shadow too dark. Chandeliers still burned, the orchestra still played. But beneath the gold shimmer, something venomous coiled. Ayla leaned toward her sister, her smile still dazzling for the crowd, but her voice low. "Did you see him?" "The man in black." Amara's eyes widened. "You saw him too?" Ayla nodded, fingers tightening around her flute. He was watching Ethan, then gone. Their eyes flicked to the envelope beneath Adrian's hand, his fingers pressing it flat against the linen as though concealing a storm. His expression was unreadable, his composure restored, but his pallor betrayed him. The sisters exchanged a glance. They did not yet understand, but they knew this night was no longer about vows and champagne. The stage had been set, but the script was darker than anyone dared imagine. Later, when Ethan reached casually for the envelope, Adrian's reflex was too swift. His hand intercepted, sliding the object into his jacket with practiced ease. "Business." Adrian murmured, his voice smooth but taut. "Nothing is worth spoiling tonight." Ethan arched a brow, amusement flickering across his lips, then returned to Ayla, whose eyes still shimmered with unease. She fought to Barry. To him, the world was laughter and light. To Adrian and Amara, the glitter was a lie. And somewhere in the shadows of Manhattan, danger had RSVP'd. The night unraveled toward its peak. Toasts, dances, applause echoing like thunder within marble walls. The chandeliers burned brighter, mocking the darkness gathering unseen. Then, a single sound cleaved the perfection. Not laughter, not applause. A gunshot, sharp, merciless. Glass shattered. A wine bottle burst crimson across the floor. Guests screamed, dresses swirled in panic, tuxedos stumbled, and security rushed too late. And in the midst of chaos, Ethan stood frozen. Ayla clutched against his arm, his steel-gray eyes locking onto the far balcony, where smoke curled faintly from the barrel of a gun. The shooter had already vanished into the night, but blood dripped onto white marble. Not Ethan's. A guard crumpled crimson, pooling beneath his tuxedo. The room erupted. The illusion of elegance was shredded in a single breath, and in that instant, beneath chandeliers burning like cruel stars, 4 lives. 2 brothers, 2 sisters, were bound not by fate's gentle hand, but by its sharpened blade. The music had died. The flowers still bloomed, but their fragrance was tainted by fear. Guests fled like startled birds, gowns tearing glasses, falling chairs overturned. Adrian's voice, low and fierce, cut through the storm as he seized Amara's wrist. "You shouldn't be here." Ethan tightened his grip on Ayla's trembling hand. His gaze burned with both fury and certainty. This is only the beginning. And high above the chaos, the chandeliers glittered on mocking merciless, as if the universe relished the spectacle of love, danger, and betrayal entwining at last. The ballroom, once golden and glittering, lay in ruin. Chairs overturned, glass scattered like fallen stars, flowers trampled under frantic footsteps. The chandeliers still blazed overhead, casting cruel light over chaos, but the music had died, leaving only the echo of panic. Ethan Walker stood unmoving in the wreckage, his jaw tight, his steel-gray eyes scanning the balcony where the gunshot had originated. Beside him, Ayla Johnson's hand trembled against his sleeve. Her body pressed instinctively closer, as though proximity to him meant safety. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low, steady, sharper than any command yet, threaded with something personal. She shook her head quickly. "No. But you—" "It wasn't me." He cut in gaze, still fixed on the balcony. His tone was clipped, but Ayla caught the flicker in his eyes' recognition. Whoever had fired the shot, Ethan knew more than he let slip. Across the room, Adrian bent over the fallen guard, his hands moving with clinical precision. Blood soaked the marble in a widening pool, the scent of iron tangling with perfume and smoke. "Pulse weak," Adrian muttered, tearing the guard's shirt open to find the wound. "He needs immediate surgery." Amara knelt beside him without hesitation, pressing her hands against the wound, her ivory gown blooming red beneath her fingers. Her calm was unshaken, her voice steady even as her heart pounded. "Pressure here," she directed. "Keep his airway clear. If we stabilize the bleeding." Their eyes met in the briefest second of unspoken unity. 2 strangers, yet their rhythm aligned, like they had done this together 100 times. By the time sirens wailed outside, most of the guests had fled. Only fragments of luxury remained, half-drained glasses, crushed orchids. The echo of laughter now turned to silence. Police swarmed in their radios, crackling their questions sharp. "Mr. Walker, do you know who might have wanted to target you?" one officer asked. Ethan's response was smooth, almost rehearsed. "Enemies come with wealth, but this was an attack on my family, on everyone here. Find whoever dared to bring violence into my house." Ayla caught the subtle lift of his brow as he spoke. The performance layered so seamlessly, it could have fooled anyone. But not her. Not after she had seen his hand clench when the envelope appeared. Behind them, Adrian rose from the bloodied marble, his tuxedo stained scarlet, his breath heavy. The guard had been rushed away, the outcome uncertain. Amara touched Adrian's arm softly, not as a stranger, but as someone who had shared the weight of another man's fading heartbeat. Her fingers lingered longer than necessary, a silent acknowledgement that both had seen too much to pretend otherwise. Adrian looked at her, then truly looked, and the sharp lines of his restraint softened for a heartbeat. Later, the twins sat in silence in the black limousine that carried them away from the chaos. Ayla and Amara had been escorted as guests under protection, but the air was tight, coiled with words unsaid. Ethan poured himself a glass of whiskey from the car's bar, the liquid catching faint light. He swirled it once, then set it down untouched. His reflection in the tinted window looked more like a mask than a man. "You knew," Adrian said finally, his voice low but sharp, "that envelope. You knew what it meant." Ethan's jaw tensed, but his reply was even. Speculation is dangerous. Better to act when the time is right. Speculation. Adrian's tone rose brittle. A man nearly died. Another shot was meant for you or for me. And you call it speculation. Amara glanced between them, her hand unconsciously tightening around the edge of her seat. She had walked into a world she barely understood. Yet instinct told her this was not the first time the Walker brothers had stood on opposite sides of silence. Ayla leaned forward, her eyes steady on Ethan. Who sent that envelope? For the first time that night, a flicker of something raw passed over Ethan's face. Hesitation. Then it vanished, replaced by his usual composure. Business, he said, and business is mine to handle. Not if it puts everyone else in danger. Ayla shot back, her voice like steel cloaked in silk. Their eyes locked, hers fierce, his unreadable. Something dangerous pulsed between them, a collision neither could avoid. Hours later, the city lay beneath them like a field of broken stars. Adrian stepped out onto the penthouse balcony, his tuxedo discarded for a plain white shirt still marked with faint bloodstains. He leaned against the railing, his hand curled loosely around a glass of water, though he hadn't touched it. The air was sharp, carrying the metallic tang of rain on steel. He closed his eyes just for a moment, as though the darkness might offer a reprieve. He didn't hear her approach until she spoke. You shouldn't be out here alone. Amara's voice was soft but firm, carrying the steadiness of someone who had seen too much to be afraid. She stepped beside him, her gown now hidden beneath a borrowed coat, her hair tumouring loose from the night's chaos. Adrian turned startled, then gave a half-smile that never reached his eyes. Neither should you. They stood in silence for a moment, the city's hum below them. I saw your face, Amara said quietly. When you looked at that envelope, you recognized it. Adrian's jaw tightened. You notice too much, and you hide too much. He let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. Both may be true. Her gaze softened, but her voice remained steady. You don't have to carry it alone, you know. Something in his chest clenched at her words. For years, Adrian had mastered the art of silence of shadows. Yet here was a woman he had met only hours ago, who had bled with him over a stranger's wound, daring to strip away the walls he lived behind. He looked at her, then truly looked, and he felt seen for the first time in a long while. Meanwhile, inside, Ayla wandered the vast penthouse halls, the remnants of champagne and roses lingering faintly in the air. She should have been exhausted, but her pulse still raced, her mind replaying the stare of the man in black, the weight of Ethan's hand on her arm. She found him in the library, standing by the window, the city lights painting his face in fractured gold. A decanter sat untouched beside him, files spread across the desk neatly. You're not celebrating your survival, she said, folding her arms. His lips curved faintly. Survival is nothing to celebrate. It's expected. She stepped closer, her voice low. And the envelope. Was that expected too? Ethan turned, his gaze piercing. You ask dangerous questions, and you give evasive answers. Their stares collided, neither willing to yield. For the first time in her career as a journalist, Ayla felt as though she had stumbled not into a story, but into a storm. Ethan asked if you constantly chase the truth, even when it could destroy you. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Something in his eyes shifted, admiration perhaps, or warning. Maybe both. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of his presence. Then you'll fit in this world more than you think. But be careful, Ayla. Curiosity is a flame, and flames burn. Her breath caught not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. The night deepened, but sleep never came. In separate corners of the penthouse, all four lay awake, Ethan haunted by shadows of business gone too far. Adrian by the blood still staining his hands. Ayla by the piercing stare of a man who lived in secrets. Amara by the weight of a gaze that had finally let her in. The envelope remained locked in Adrian's jacket pocket, its contents still unknown, but its presence pulsed through the room like a hidden bomb waiting to detonate. And outside, beneath the city's sleepless sky, someone else watched. The man in black leaned against a shadowed wall across the street, his cigarette glowing faintly before he crushed it beneath his heel. A smile curled on his lips, sharp and cold. "The game has begun," he whispered to no one, and the night swallowed him whole. The penthouse still carried the echo of broken glass and hurried footsteps. Though hours had passed since the chaos at the plaza, unease clung to the air like smoke that refused to disperse. Adrian sat alone in the study, the envelope heavy in his hands. It was ivory unmarked, except for the faint wax seal, pressed with a crest, an intricate W entwined with thorns. His thumb lingered over it, tracing the grooves, as though the paper might bleed its secrets without being opened. He had seen that crest before. Years ago, hidden deep in Walker archives, in documents his father once ordered locked away. You knew, Amara's voice whispered in his mind. She had been right. He recognized it instantly, though he wished he hadn't. The door creaked softly. He looked up. Amara stood in the doorway, her hair cascading loose around her shoulders, her expression hesitant, yet unwavering. She had changed into a simple dress, borrowed from the guest closet, but even stripped of silk and grandeur, she carried herself with quiet gravity. "You haven't opened it," she said. Adrian exhaled. "Because I already know what's inside." She stepped closer, her gaze steady. "And that terrifies you more than the not knowing." His lips curved into a humorless smile. Perhaps. For a moment, silence stretched between them, fragile as glass. Then, with a decisive motion, Adrian broke the seal. The paper inside was crisp, folded with surgical precision. Adrian's eyes scanned the words, his face tightening with each line. "Ethan Walker, you stand where you do not belong. The crown you wear was never yours to inherit. Step aside or fall. This city does not need two heirs. It only needs one, and blood will decide." The letter bore no signature, only the crest again at the bottom, inked in black. Adrian's hand clenched, veins tightening against the paper. Amara reached for it, her fingertips brushing his as she pulled it gently from his grasp. She read the words silently, her eyes darkening with each line. "This isn't just business," she whispered. "It's war." Adrian nodded slowly. And war has always begun with family. When Ethan entered moments later, his presence filled the room like a storm. His steel-gray eyes locked onto the letter instantly, and before Amara could hand it back, he snatched it from her grip. The silence as he read was more dangerous than any outburst. His jaw tightened, his shoulders squared, but his composure remained a mask, forged from years of carrying empires on his back. "This changes nothing," Ethan said at last, his voice sharp as glass. "Whoever wrote this underestimates us. They think fear will divide us." Adrian rose from his chair, his tone biting. "Fear doesn't divide us, Ethan. You do with your secrets. You carry crowns as if no one else has the right to breathe beneath them." Ethan's composure cracked for the first time that night, his eyes flashing. "You think this letter was meant for me alone? Read again. It speaks of heirs. That includes you. You're not outside the target." "Adrian, you're the target." The air between them bristled heavy with years of unspoken resentment. Amara stepped back instinctively, torn between them, her pulse racing. It was Ayla's voice that cut through the tension. She leaned against the doorway. Arms crossed, her silver-threaded gown, replaced with a borrowed shirt that hung loosely around her frame. Yet even in disarray, She radiated fire. "So what now?" Ayla asked, her voice steady. "Do you both tear each other apart while someone else pulls the strings?" "Because that's precisely what they want." Ethan's gaze snapped to her. The force of his stare might have silenced anyone else for a moment. But Ayla did not flinch. "You're reckless," he said. "You don't understand what's at stake." "No," she countered. "I understand too well. I've seen this before. Power breeds enemies. Enemies breed blood. But if you fight each other, you'll be doing their work for them." Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. The words died on his tongue, leaving only the taut silence of someone unused to being challenged. Ayla stepped forward, her eyes locked on his. "If you want to survive Ethan Walker, you'd better start treating the people around you as more than pawns, because pawns break. And some of us bite back." Something flickered in his eyes, then not anger, not disdain. Something sharper. Admiration edged with danger. The letter lay between them on the desk, its words burning into memory. No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Adrian turned to Amara, his voice softer than it had been all evening. "Please stay away from us. From me. You don't deserve to be pulled into this." But Amara shook her head, her gaze unwavering. "I saw a man bleeding out tonight, Adrian. I saw you fighting to save him, even when your world collapsed. That's not someone I walk away from. Not now." His throat tightened, but he said nothing, afraid that words might undo him. Ethan, meanwhile, studied Ayla, as though she were a puzzle he both despised and craved. She had defied him without fear, spoken truths no one dared. And he found it impossible to look away from that fire god, that fire. Later, the penthouse settled into uneasy quiet. Security patrolled the halls. The city pulsed faintly through the glass walls. But the silence was thick with what had been left unsaid within. On the balcony, Adrian stood again, this time, with Amara beside him, the night air wrapped around them, calm and sharp. "Do you always carry the world on your shoulders?" she asked gently. He let out a breath. "Someone has to." Her hand brushed his, tentative yet certain. "Maybe. But sometimes the world doesn't need you to carry it. Sometimes it requires you to let someone walk beside you." The words struck him more profoundly than she could know. For so long, Adrian had believed himself to be the shadow of Ethan's light, destined to be overlooked, necessary only when crisis demanded. Yet in her eyes, he was not a shadow. He was seen, and that terrified him more than the letter ever could. Inside, Ethan poured a second glass of whiskey he had not drunk. Ayla entered quietly, her steps purposeful. "You should rest," she said. He glanced at her, the faintest curve on his lips. "Rest is for men who can afford it, or for men who believe they'll see tomorrow." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Ethan felt the edges of his composure fray for the first time in years, not from threat or ambition, but from a woman whose courage cut sharper than any blade. "Why do you care?" he asked, his voice low. "Because I don't want to watch another man bleed while pretending he's made of stone," Ayla replied. Her words sank into him like fire through ice. He wanted to answer, but for once words abandoned him. Far below, in the shadows of the street, the man in black lit another cigarette. The smoke curled upward, disappearing into the night sky. He pulled out a phone, his voice low as he spoke. "They've read the letter. Division has begun." A pause, then a faint laugh, cold and merciless. "Tell Edward the message was received." In the penthouse, 4 lives intertwined. 2 brothers bound by blood yet divided by history. 2 sisters pulled into a storm they could neither predict nor escape. The letter lay on the desk, its threat heavy in the air. Outside, New York roared with life, oblivious to the war brewing in silence. And somewhere deep within each heart, love had already begun to bloom, fragile, forbidden, yet undeniable. The night was no longer just a night. It was the opening act of a battle written in blood. The city wore its midnight mask, steel towers glittering like silent sentinels, neon signs flickering in restless rhythm. Yet beneath the hum of life, shadows stirred with purpose. Tonight would not pass without blood. Ethan Walker's limousine slid smoothly along Fifth Avenue, its tinted windows reflecting the blurred lights of Manhattan. Inside, he sat in silence, the cityscape rushing past, as though it were nothing more than a stage set for his thoughts. Ayla sat opposite him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She hadn't wanted to come. She told herself she didn't trust him yet. When Ethan had insisted on escorting her home, her defiance had faltered. Something about how he had looked at her, a fleeting softness beneath steel, had unraveled her. The driver's voice came suddenly sharply. "Mr. Walker, car behind us." No plates. Ethan's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. A black SUV trailed too close, headlights glaring unnaturally bright. His pulse quickened, though his face remained unreadable. "Keep steady," Ethan ordered. "Do not slow." But before the words had finished, the SUV lunged. Metal slammed against metal, the screech of impact tearing through the night. The limousine swerved violently, Ayla clutching the seat as glass rattled. "What's happening?" she gasped, fear lacing her voice. Ethan's gaze burned cold. "They've come for me." The SUV struck again, harder this time. The driver struggled, knuckles white around the wheel. "Hold on." Ethan reached for Ayla, gripping her arm as the limousine spun, tires shrieking against asphalt. For a heartbeat, the world tilted. Ayla saw only headlights, felt the crush of gravity, heard the roar of steel folding in on itself. And then, deafening silence before the car slammed into the guardrail, skidding to a brutal halt. Smoke curled from the hood, the acrid stench of gasoline filling the air. Ayla coughed, her throat burning, her mind screaming to move. She turned. Ethan was half-conscious, blood seeping from a cut above his brow. His bodyguard slumped, unmoving. Her heart pounded. She had seconds. She pulled at the door, it jammed. With a cry of desperation, Ayla grabbed a shard of metal, prying with strength, born not of muscle, but of fear. The door gave way with a wrenching groan. "Ethan," she cried, slipping her arms under his. He was heavier than she expected, his body a dead weight, but adrenaline drove her forward. She dragged him free, just as the SUV rammed once more. The limousine shuddered, the smell of gasoline thickening, flames threatening to rise. With one final burst of strength, Ayla pulled Ethan clear, collapsing onto the pavement with him cradled against her. His eyes fluttered open, gray irises unfocused until they landed on her face. "Ayla." His voice was hoarse, broken. Why are you here?" Tears stung her eyes, though she forced her voice steady. "Because someone had to keep you alive, Ethan Walker. Even if you think you don't deserve it." For a moment, the chaos around them blurred into nothing. There was only her trembling hand pressed against his bloodied cheek, his gaze holding hers with something raw, unguarded, something neither power nor money could disguise. Across the city, Adrian Walker attended a gala hosted by the Metropolitan Medical Foundation. Unlike Ethan, Adrian had no guards flanking him and no chauffeur-driven entrance. He preferred it that way. Here he was not a billionaire's heir, but a doctor respected for skill rather than name. The hall glittered, though not with the grandeur of the plaza. This was quieter, dignified white tablecloths, muted string quartets, earnest speeches about funding and research. Amara stood near him, her emerald dress radiant, yet straightforward. She had not intended to attend, but when Adrian invited her, something in his voice, a rare note of vulnerability, had compelled her to say yes. They shared polite conversations, glasses of red wine, fleeting smiles that lingered longer than they should. For once, Adrian seemed lighter. The weight of shadows briefly lifted. until he took another sip. The moment was subtle at first. A flicker across his face, a tightening of his jaw. Then sudden and sharp, his hand clutched the table's edge, his glass shattering to the floor. Adrian Amara's voice trembled as she reached for him. His vision blurred, sweat beating along his brow. His breath quickened, his body convulsing with invisible pain. Amara's training surged forward, shoving panic aside. She lowered him gently to the floor, her voice commanding though her hands shook. "Call an ambulance now. He's been poisoned." Gasps rippled through the room, but Amara blocked them out. She tilted his head, checked his breathing, and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. His pulse was erratic, fading. "No," she whispered fiercely. "You're not leaving me here." She ripped fabric from her dress, hem improvising a compress. "Adrian, stay with me. Listen to my voice. You can't give up." His eyes fluttered, lips pale, whispering something inaudible. She leaned closer. "You saved me," he rasped. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced a trembling smile. "Yes, and I'll save you again. Because you matter, Adrian. You matter more than you know." She pressed rhythm into his chest, every push, pouring her heart into him, until at last, the faint beep of life returned. Relief shattered her composure. She bent over him, her forehead against his whispering words she never intended to say aloud. "I can't lose you. Not now. Not ever." 2 places. 2 battles. 2 women who refused to let death claim the men who had already claimed pieces of their hearts. When Ethan finally stirred in the hospital hours later, the first thing he saw was Ayla asleep in the chair beside his bed, her hand still gripping his. And when Adrian opened his eyes under fluorescent light, Amara's tear-streaked face greeted him, her hand resting over his heart as if to keep it beating. For both brothers, survival was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to the women who had defied fire and poison to drag them back. Morning broke over Manhattan, pale and indifferent. But within Walker Tower, the atmosphere seethed. Ethan sat in his room, bandaged but restless, Ayla stubbornly refusing to leave his side. She hovered with quiet determination, her warmth a shield against his cold silence. "You should rest," she urged softly. "I don't rest," he replied. "Rest is for those who aren't hunted." She met his gaze unyielding. "Then, let me be hunted with you." For the first time, his breath caught not from pain, but from the audacity of her heart. Across the hall, Adrian lay weak but alive, and Amara perched at his bedside. He studied her quietly, afraid she might vanish if he blinked. "You shouldn't have stayed," he whispered, "and let you fight alone." Her voice broke. "Never." His hand found hers, tentative, trembling. For once, the man who had lived in shadows allowed himself to be held in the light. In the shadows of a private office across the city, Edward Walker raised a glass of scotch. His reflection fractured in the glass wall behind him. "They survived," a voice reported over the phone. Edward's smile was sharp, dangerous. "Of course they did. It's in their blood to fight." "But blood—" He swirled the amber liquid. "Spills all the same." Night had ended, but the war had only begun. Ethan and Ayla, Adrian and Amara. Their fates are now stitched by blood and fire, by choices that can no longer be undone. Love had entered the battlefield not as weakness, but as the only force capable of defying bullets, poison, and betrayal. And in the silence that followed, one truth rang louder than gunfire. Neither power nor enemies would decide their story. Love would. The sun poured through the towering windows of Walker Tower, gilding the marble floors with indifferent light. But the brightness did little to warm the air. Inside, silence stretched taut, heavy as chains. Ethan sat rigid in the library, his wounds still bandaged, his mind restless. Across from him, Ayla hovered near the shelves, her hands tracing the spines of books she wasn't reading. The events of the past days lingered like smoke gunfire twisted steel poison. Survival had bound them closer, but survival was only the beginning. The door opened, and with it, the temperature seemed to fall. Richard Walker entered first, tall and silver-haired, carrying the authority of decades spent ruling boardrooms. Behind him came Eleanor, elegant in pearl gray, her gaze cool and assessing. They moved with the gravity of monarchs who were not questioned, but obeyed. Ethan Richards said, his tone clipped. "We heard about the attack. You should have called us sooner." "I had other priorities," Ethan replied evenly. His eyes flicked to Ayla, a subtle gesture that did not escape his father's notice. Eleanor's gaze followed. Her expression sharpened, though her smile remained poised. "And this must be Ayla Johnson," Ethan said, rising. His voice carried steel-daring contradiction. "She saved my life." The silence that followed was colder than any storm. Richard's eyes hardened, his jaw set. "We appreciate her bravery. However, appreciation is not the same as acceptance." Ayla straightened her voice, calm but resolute. "I didn't ask for acceptance. I acted because a life was at stake." Eleanor's smile thinned. "And yet here you are standing beside my son in our home. Do you understand what that means? Miss Johnson, the world will not see you as his savior. They will see you as a complication." The words stung, though Ayla's chin lifted higher. "If love is a complication, your world has its values backwards." Richard's voice cut in sharp as glass. "Love does not build empires. Discipline does. Sacrifice does. And if Ethan chooses to gamble our legacy for sentiment, then he is no son of mine." Ethan's fists clenched, his voice like thunder breaking marble. "Do not mistake love for weakness, father. The empire means nothing if it demands I sacrifice my humanity." For the first time, Ayla saw the fracture not between Ethan and Adrian, but between Ethan and the man who had raised him. Adrian lay propped against his pillows elsewhere in the tower, still pale but recovering. Amara sat at his side reviewing medical charts, her brow furrowed. She had spent the night in his room, refusing to leave until she was certain his condition had stabilized. The door opened. Eleanor entered, her eyes softening slightly at the sight of her younger son. "Adrian," she murmured, "you frightened us." He managed a faint smile. "I'm harder to kill than they think." Her gaze flicked to Amara, whose hand rested gently on Adrian's arm. The softness vanished. "And you must be Miss Johnson as well," Eleanor said, the doctor. Amara rose politely, her tone calm. "Yes, I'm Amara, and your son is alive because I refused to let him go." Eleanor's lips curved, but the smile never reached her eyes. "And for that, we thank you. But Adrian's survival should not be confused with entitlement to his future." Adrian's eyes darkened. "Mother." "No!" Eleanor interrupted, her voice sharp. "You are heirs of Walker Global. You cannot afford distractions." Amara inhaled, slowly steadying herself. She had faced prejudice in hospitals, whispers in corridors, dismissals from colleagues who saw only her skin before her skill. But standing here, before the woman whose blood ran through Adrian's veins, the sting was sharper. "I'm not a distraction," Amara said softly. "I'm the one who stayed when death tried to take him. Can your empire claim the same?" Adrian's breath caught his hand tightening over hers. For once, words failed him. That night, the twins found themselves in the same room for the first time since the attacks. The library was quiet, save for the crackle of firelight. Ethan stood by the window, his silhouette cut sharply against the city. Adrian sat across from him, a glass of water in his hand. Between them stretched years of rivalry, resentment, and an unspoken bond neither could sever. "Our parents won't accept them," Adrian said finally. They don't need to, Ethan replied. His voice was low, confident. I won't live by their approval. Adrian studied him, searching for weakness. And if it costs you everything, Ethan turned his eyes steel. Then everything was never mine to begin with. Silence fell heavy and thick. For the first time, Adrian realized the war ahead was not just with Edward Harrington or nameless assassins. It was with their own blood. Later in the guest suite, the Johnson sisters sat together. Ayla paced restlessly, her fire untamed, while Amara sat calmly, hands folded in her lap. They'll never accept us, Ayla muttered. To them, we'll always be outsiders too. Poor, dark, and ordinary. Amara's gaze softened. Perhaps. But acceptance is not the measure of love. We don't need their permission to choose our paths. Ayla stopped pacing, her eyes burning. You love Adrian. Amara didn't deny it. Her silence was answer enough. And you love Ethan, Amara added gently. Ayla exhaled, her voice breaking. I don't want to. God knows I don't. But when I saw him bleeding in my arms, when he looked at me like I was the only thing holding him here, I knew I was already his. The sisters exchanged a glance filled with fear and unshakable resolve. Across the city, in a suite shadowed by heavy drapes, Edward Walker poured himself another glass of scotch. Tell me, he said to the man in black standing across from him. How do the heirs look now? Divided, the man replied. The brothers fight each other. Their parents fight them. The women are their weakness. Edward smiled thinly. Then we've already won. Empires don't fall by bullets. They fall in love. In the tower, Ayla slipped onto the balcony where Ethan stood, staring out over the sleepless city. His expression was unreadable, his hands resting against the railing as though anchoring himself against an invisible storm. You heard them, Ayla said softly. Your parents. They'll never see me as anything more than a liability. Ethan turned his eyes, locking onto hers. Let them see what they want. It changes nothing for me. Her breath caught. Why? Because when I was bleeding on the street, when fire was about to consume me, it wasn't wealth or legacy that saved me. It was you. Ayla's throat tightened. And if standing with you means losing everything I've ever known. He stepped closer, his hand lifting to brush against her cheek, tentative yet confident. Then, I'll build you a world worth losing for. Her heart stuttered, caught between terror and desire. For once, she let herself lean into his touch, closing the distance, not with words, but with silence that spoke louder. At the same hour, Amara sat beside Adrian, who had finally fallen into a restless sleep. She watched him quietly, her hand resting over his. His strength had always seemed unshakable, yet he looked fragile, human, and breakable tonight. She smiled softly, when his eyes fluttered open, hazy, but focused on her. You should sleep, he murmured. So should you, she whispered back. His lips curved faintly. Stay. Please. Her heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. She squeezed his hand gently. I was never leaving. In the dim light, their fingers intertwined, two souls clinging to each other in defiance of the world outside. The Walker Tower was quiet, but not peaceful. Parents against children, brothers against brothers, love against legacy. In the shadows, enemies waited, watching as fractures widened within the empire. But in the quiet of stolen moments, on balconies, at bedside tables, in whispered vows, never meant to be spoken, love grew stronger than the walls built to contain it. And somewhere deep within, destiny smiled. For though bloodlines weighed heavily, hearts had already chosen their rebellion. The morning papers bled ink like fresh wounds. Headlines sprawled across the front pages of every major publication. Walker Global faces allegations of fraud. Hidden accounts linked to Harrington transactions. Whispers of internal betrayal. Ethan stood at the breakfast table, the pages spread before him. His jaw was set, his eyes flint, but inside a storm raged. He had fought enemies in boardrooms before, investors, rivals, politicians, but never had the battlefield been so deeply personal. Across from him, Ayla scanned the articles, her brows furrowing. "They're framing you." "Framing us," Ethan corrected, his tone clipped. "Walker Global is more than my name. It's our inheritance, our bloodline." Ayla's gaze flicked up to him, her voice calm but fierce. And Edward knows precisely where to strike. Not with bullets this time, but with whispers. Ethan's lips curved in a humorless smile. Whispers kill faster than bullets. Upstairs, Adrian paced the length of his study, his movements restless. Amara sat at his desk, her fingers tracing the edge of a discarded report. She had never seen him like this, frustrated, disoriented, his usual composure unraveling thread by thread. "They've fabricated documents," Adrian muttered. "Offshore accounts and forged signatures look convincing. Investors will panic." Amara tilted her head, her voice steady. "Then show them the truth. If this is Edward's work, there must be inconsistencies." Adrian stopped, his storm-gray eyes locking on hers. "You don't understand. In this world, truth isn't enough. Perception is power. And right now, perception is against us." She rose, crossing the room to stand before him. Her hand touched his arm, grounding him. "Then fight perception with something more substantial. Not alone, Adrian. With me." His throat tightened, the weight of her words pressing deeper than any accusation in the papers. For so long he had carried the burden in silence. Now, for the first time, someone offered not pity, but partnership. In a dark-paneled office across the city, Edward Walker poured himself a scotch, the amber liquid catching faint light. He slid the morning paper across his desk to the man in black, whose expression betrayed nothing. "Perfect timing," Edward mused. "The heirs will spend their energy defending themselves, too busy to see the knife slipping closer." The man in black inclined his head. "And the Harringtons, pleased," Edward said smoothly. "Their funds bought the headlines. My name purchased the silence of those who might have spoken otherwise. It is a simple equation. Loyalty for sale, and betrayal is always cheaper than blood." His smile curved cold and precise. "And when the brothers finally fall, the empire will be mine." By noon, Walker Tower's boardroom filled with voices raised too loud, too sharp. Executives pounded fists on polished wood, voices spilling with accusation and panic. "We've lost 2 contracts overnight," one barked. "The stock has dropped 7% in hours." Another snapped. "If this continues, we'll bleed out within weeks." Ethan sat at the head of the table, his posture unyielding, his gaze slicing through the chaos. Beside him, Adrian sat tense, his fingers drumming once against the wood before stilling. "Enough," Ethan commanded, his voice steady as thunder. Silence fell. "This is sabotage," Ethan continued, "and it will not destroy us. We will investigate every accusation, trace every forged account, and dismantle the lies piece by piece." "Investigate?" A board member scoffed. "While the Harringtons gain ground, while your family feud becomes a public spectacle, you expect us to gamble the company on hope." Ethan's jaw clenched. But before he could respond, Adrian spoke. "Not hope." Adrian said, his voice low but resonant. "Evidence. Strategy. Truth. We are not here to beg for faith, but to prove we are unbreakable." For a moment, silence reigned again. Even Ethan glanced at his brother, a flicker of pride beneath the steel. But as the meeting dispersed, whispers lingered in corners, doubts crawling like shadows. Later, Ayla scrolled through her phone in a quiet lounge, her journalist's instincts burning. Headlines twisted Ethan's name, framing him as reckless, arrogant, and corrupt. She slammed the phone down, her breath shaking. "They're turning you into a villain," she told Ethan. "I've been a villain before," Ethan replied coolly. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "Not to me." For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. His hand reached for hers, his voice a whisper only she could hear. "Don't let them take that from me." In another corner of the tower, Amara reviewed medical files, her brow furrowed in thought. Adrian entered quietly, watching her before speaking. He said softly that you read business reports as though they were medical charts. She smiled faintly. "They're both about lives. One heartbeat, one contract. They're more alike than you think." His chest tightened, and when both begin to fail, her eyes lifted steady, unwavering. "Then we fight harder. We don't surrender to shadows." The silence followed was tender, intimate, filled with all the words neither dared to speak. That evening, the city lights flickered against the windows, painting fractured gold across the tower's marble halls. Ethan found Ayla on the balcony, her hair lifted by the wind, her eyes scanning the restless streets below. "You don't belong in this world," he said quietly. She turned, her lips curving wryly. "Then why do I feel like I've been here all along?" He stepped closer, his gaze burning. "Because you were meant to be with me." Her breath caught. For a moment, the weight of empires, of bloodlines, of enemies, all of it faded. Only the man before her was stripped of armor, offering not power, but vulnerability. And when he leaned in, their lips met not as a beginning or an end, but as a vow whispered in silence. Across the tower, Adrian sat with Amara in the study files, scattered across the desk between them. He looked at her, his voice low. "When they poisoned me, when I thought I was slipping away, the only thought I had was you." Her eyes softened, her throat tightening. "Adrian." "No," he interrupted, his hand brushing hers. "I need you to know. You are not a distraction. You are the only reason I want to fight at all." Her heart ached, torn between fear and desire, but when his hand lingered, she did not pull away. At midnight, another blow struck. News broke of a supposed whistleblower, an anonymous voice claiming to be a Walker insider, releasing evidence of embezzlement, bribes, and shadow deals. The internet erupted, investors recoiled, and the empire trembled. In the penthouse, Ethan slammed the report onto the table, fury burning in his eyes. "There's a traitor inside," he growled. "Someone close enough to know the cracks. Edward has bought one of our own." Adrian's gaze was grim. "And until we find who, every move we make will be poisoned." The silence that followed was thick with dread. Ayla and Amara exchanged a glance, their resolve mirroring. They were no longer bystanders. They were part of this war. The Walker Empire bled not from bullets, but from shadows, whispers, betrayal. Edward had made his move, and the world was watching. But within the fractures, something new was being born. Love fierce and unyielding. Bonds forged not by wealth, not by legacy, but by fire. And as the city slept restlessly, 4 hearts carried the same vow: they will not break us, not by lies, not by blood, not by fear. The invitation was gilded, the lettering precise. An evening with the Walkers. On the surface, it was a family dinner. In truth, it was an ambush. Ethan knew it when he saw his father's signature at the bottom. Richard Walker never wasted pleasantries. If he called his sons to dinner, it was not for affection. It was for control. The dining hall of Walker Manor was a cathedral of wealth, high-arched ceilings, crystal chandeliers, portraits of ancestors glaring down with painted authority. The long table gleamed under candlelight silverware, arranged like weapons awaiting battle. Richard sat at the head, Eleanor poised beside him, pearls at her throat, her expression unreadable. Ethan and Adrian entered together, though tension hung between them like a storm cloud. Behind them, Ayla and Amara followed, shoulders squared, their presence both defiance and vulnerability. Every gaze at the table turned toward the sisters. The scrutiny was sharp, merciless. Richard's voice broke the silence. "So these are the women who have complicated our bloodline." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "These are the women who saved our lives." Richard waved a dismissive hand. "Lives are always saved and lost in this family. There is no currency for belonging." Ayla's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Her silence was its own fire. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice smooth as silk over steel. "We do not question their bravery, but bravery does not erase history. Our empire was built on legacy, on alliances carefully chosen. What do you imagine happens when our name becomes entangled with scandal, with whispers of misalliance?" Adrian's voice, quieter but sharper, cut through. "Our empire is already bleeding. It may be time to measure worth by something other than bloodlines." The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Ethan looked to his brother, then back to his parents. "You speak of legacy, but what use is a legacy without honor, without love?" Richard's fist struck the table, crystal trembling under the blow. "Love does not preserve empires. Loyalty does. Discipline does. You dare risk everything for sentiment, for women who cannot understand the weight of our name." Ayla rose slowly, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath. "It isn't us who fail to understand. Maybe it's you clinging to chains while the world burns around you." Gasps echoed down the table. Eleanor's eyes blazed. Richard's lips curled into fury. And for the first time, Ethan smiled not with amusement, but with pride. The fallout was immediate. By morning, society pages buzzed with whispers. Photographs leaked. Ethan's hand was brushing Ayla's at the balcony, and Adrian caught him looking at Amara with something too tender for casual acquaintance. Walker heirs, entangled in scandalous affairs. Sisters from modest roots, threatened dynasty. Charity luncheons buzzed with speculation. Boardrooms hummed with judgment. The empire's fractures widened under the weight of gossip. Ayla read the articles in silence, her chest tight. She had been scrutinized before as a journalist, but this was different. They weren't dissecting her work. They were dissecting her existence. Amara tried to shield her, but the headlines found them both. Gold diggers, one column spat. Opportunists, another sneered. Yet when Ayla looked up, she found Ethan standing beside her. Jaw, hard gaze, unwavering. "Let them write," he said. "Words don't break us. Truth does." But the truth Ayla feared was precisely what Edward was weaving against them. Edward Walker read the newspapers in a penthouse across the city with quiet satisfaction. The Harringtons sat across from him, their smiles sharp as knives. "Society is turning," one of them said. "Your nephews look weak, divided. The empire trembles." Edward swirled his glass, his voice calm. "Trembling is not enough. We must make it fall." How, the Harrington heir asked. Edward's smile curved by ensuring that the women who saved them became the weapons that destroyed them. That night, Ethan found Adrian in the study, the firelight casting sharp lines across their faces. "You spoke against them," Ethan said quietly. "Against father, against mother." Adrian's eyes lifted, stormy but steady. "And you expected silence?" "No," Ethan admitted. "I expected distance. You've always chosen shadows over fire." Adrian's lips curved faintly. "I've learned fire has its uses." The brothers shared a long look. Resentment, admiration, unspoken unity, flickering beneath the fracture. For once, Ethan reached across the divide, his voice low. Then stand with me, not as rivals, as brothers. Adrian hesitated, then nodded once. Amara brushed Ayla's hair gently in their shared room, the rhythm steady, soothing. You held your ground tonight, Amara murmured. I burned the ground, Ayla corrected bitterly. And now we're the scandal of New York. Amara's smile was soft. Scandal fades. What remains is truth. Ayla turned her eyes glistening. And what truth do you see? That love isn't weakness, Amara whispered. It's survival. The sisters clasped hands, their silent vow stronger than any judgment society hurled their way. Later, Ethan found Ayla on the balcony, the city restless below. She stood wrapped in silence, her shoulders tense. Do you regret it? He asked softly. She turned her eyes fierce, despite the tears she hid. Regret saving your life, or regret standing beside you while your world tries to erase me? Ethan stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. I regret nothing that brought me to you. Her breath caught the walls she had built, trembling. Even if it costs you your empire. He lifted her chin, his gaze burning. An empire is stone. You are fire. I'd rather burn. And when his lips met hers, it was not defiance, not desperation. It was devotion, raw and unyielding. Meanwhile, Adrian sat with Amara in the study papers scattered around them. He should have been tracing accounts following trails of betrayal. Instead, he found himself tracing the lines of her hand with his gaze, memorizing every curve. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice rough. And yet I am, she replied gently. His throat tightened. When I thought the poison would take me, all I saw was you. Not Ethan, not the empire, just you. Her heart surged, her voice trembling. Then don't push me away. I'd rather walk into the fire with you than live safely without you. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed. When he opened them, his hand reached for hers, not cautious this time, but sure. At midnight, Edward stood by his window. The city sprawled below, like prey, waiting to be devoured. The empire bleeds, he whispered. Tomorrow it will kneel. Behind him, the man in black waited silent. Edward's reflection smirked back at him, a ghost of victory in the glass. In Walker Tower, love grew in defiance of legacy, whispered confessions turning into vows forged in fire. But outside, Edward's web tightened. Society's whispers sharpened into daggers, the empire's foundations cracking under betrayal. And though the brothers and the sisters stood together hand in hand, they knew the war had just begun. For love was not only their strength, it was also the weapon Edward planned to use to break them. The Walker Tower glowed like a lighthouse against Manhattan's skyline, its glass walls glistening with cold brilliance. Inside, silence lingered after days of scandal and whispers, the family bracing for another storm they knew would come. Ethan stood in the library, papers scattered across the desk. Contracts, bank statements, legal reports, each marked with the fingerprints of sabotage. He read them not as documents, but as daggers. Behind him, Ayla entered quietly, her footsteps light but sure. She had shed the gowns of gala nights for a simple blouse and dark jeans, yet she carried herself with the same fire that had silenced Richard Walker at dinner. You haven't slept, she said softly. I don't have the luxury, Ethan replied without looking up. She stepped closer, resting her hand over the papers. Then at least, stop pretending the empire is the only thing worth saving. He met her gaze, gray eyes stormy, and for a heartbeat, his composure faltered. Her touch disarmed him more than enemies ever could. On the floor above, Adrian leaned against the balcony rail, the city sprawling beneath him like a map of light and ruin. His body had healed from the poison, but his heart carried scars more invisible, more dangerous. Amara joined him, her dark hair stirred by the breeze. She held 2 mugs of coffee, pressing one into his hand without a word. "You brewed too much," she teased gently. He huffed a soft laugh, the sound rare. "I've earned the right. Brooding doesn't heal. Fighting does." Her eyes shone as she said it, and he knew she wasn't talking about corporate wars alone. He had fought his feelings for weeks, locking them away behind walls of duty and restraint. But Amara's presence eroded those walls piece by piece until only vulnerability remained. "Amara," he murmured, voice low. "If I lose everything, name Empire, even my brother's trust, would you still stay?" Her answer was immediate and specific. "Yes. Because I didn't fall in love with your empire, Adrian. I fell in love with you." The word love hung between them, fragile, yet unbreakable. He closed his eyes, letting it sink into his bones, like the first warmth after winter. The storm came at midnight. Ayla was the first to hear a crash in the hallway, followed by the low thud of boots against marble. She froze, her instincts flaring. "Ethan!" she whispered sharply. He straightened instantly, eyes narrowing, body coiling for battle. "Stay behind me." The doors burst open. Masked men in black flooded the library, weapons drawn. Down one barked, his voice distorted. Ayla's breath caught, but Ethan's arm pressed her back, his stance protective, defiant. "This is Walker Tower," Ethan growled. "You don't walk in here and walk out again." The leader tilted his head. "Not unless we carry what we came for." And with a swift motion, 2 men seized Ayla. She gasped, struggling, but their grip was iron. Ethan lunged forward, only to be struck across the face with a rifle butt. Blood split his lip, his knees buckling, but his fury burned unbroken. "Let her go." The leader's laugh was cold. "You want your empire back? Then you'll play by Edward's rules." And his first rule, love, is a weakness. Weaknesses must be removed. On the upper floors, Adrian and Amara heard the commotion. Adrian grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp, and moved swiftly toward the stairs. But before they reached the library, another group of masked men cornered them. Target secured, one muttered into a radio. Adrian stepped in front of Amara, his body a shield. "You'll have to kill me first." The gun cocked, its metallic click echoing like a death toll. Amara's pulse hammered, but her voice was steady. "Adrian, don't." He glanced at her storm-gray eyes, softening. "If I die tonight, at least it's for something worth dying for." And before she could stop him, he launched himself at the nearest attacker. The lamp shattered against the man's head, sparks flying as glass rained. Chaos erupted, shouts, fists, gunfire. Amara grabbed Adrian's hand, dragging him toward a side corridor. They ran breathless, hunted by shadows that snapped at their heels. Back in the library, Ethan fought like a man possessed. Blood streaked his cheek, his knuckles raw, but rage turned his body into a weapon. He disarmed one man, drove another into the wall, his movements brutal, precise. But every strike was fueled not by empire or legacy, but by Ayla's cry as she was dragged toward the door. "Ayla." Her eyes locked on his, fierce, even in fear. "Don't stop fighting." The words burned into him, anchoring him, as hands restrained him, forcing him to his knees. The leader pressed a gun to his temple. "Submit, or she dies." Ethan's breath was ragged, his body trembling with restrained violence. For the first time in years, he faced a choice he could not calculate or bend into a strategy. At that moment, he realized Edward had succeeded in part. Love had become his weakness, yet also his strength. Adrian and Amara stumbled back into the library, just as the standoff peaked. Adrian's shirt was torn, blood seeping from a cut above his brow, but his voice thundered. "Stop!" The leader's gaze shifted, amusement flickering. "Ah, the second heir. You're just in time." Adrian's eyes darted to the gun at Ethan's temple, then to Ayla's captors. He knew they were outnumbered, outgunned. But then he saw a mark stitched into the leader's glove. The crest. The same one from the envelope. And in a flash, clarity struck. "This isn't just Edward," Adrian whispered. "This is family. One of us betrayed from within." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Who?" The leader smirked, pressing the barrel harder against Ethan's skin. "Ask your uncle when you see him." With a sudden motion, Ayla stomped on her captor's foot, twisting free. She lunged toward Ethan, shoving the gun aside, just as it fired the bullet, tearing into the chandelier above. Glass cascaded like falling stars. The library exploded into chaos. Ethan grabbed Ayla, pulling her against him, shielding her from shards. Adrian tackled the leader, their struggle brutal, primal. Amara seized a fallen pistol, her hands shaking but steady enough to aim. "Let him go," she shouted. For a heartbeat, the room froze. The leader's eyes met hers, dark, calculating. Then he smirked. "War has only begun." With a flash of smoke, he hurled a device to the ground, the room filled with acrid fog, choking vision, searing lungs. When it cleared, the men were gone. The library was wrecked. Glass shattered, books, smoldering, blood streaked across marble. Ethan held Ayla tightly, his breath ragged his body, trembling not from fear, but from the sheer force of needing her alive. "You're hurt," she whispered, her fingers brushing the cut on his cheek. "I don't care," he rasped. "I thought I lost you." She pressed her forehead to his tears, mingling with blood and sweat. "You never will. Not while I can fight." Across the room, Amara lowered the pistol, her hand still shaking. Adrian moved to her, cupping her face gently despite his own injuries. "You saved me," he murmured. Her eyes glistened. "No, Adrian. We saved each other." Far away, Edward listened to the report over the phone. "They survived," the man in black admitted, "but barely." Edward's lips curved. "Good. Let them taste survival. Let them cling to love as though it can shield them. The deeper they fall, the harder they'll break when I cut the cord." He raised his glass, the amber liquid catching the light. To love, the sweetest weapon of all. In the wreckage of Walker Tower, 4 figures stood among broken glass and fractured silence. Brothers and sisters bound by love, defiance, and scars. They had survived bullets, poison, and betrayal. But the war was no longer a whisper. It was fire. And as the city roared outside, each of them knew the truth. Edward's blade had been unsheathed. The next strike would not be to wound. It would be to kill. The sun rose over Manhattan, indifferent to the scars left on Walker Tower. The library was still littered with glass, the scent of smoke clinging to the air. Guards swept the halls. Executives whispered in corners, but silence ruled among the 4 who had survived the night. Ethan stood at the window, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, his reflection fractured in the cracked pane. Beside him, Ayla wrapped her arms around herself, as though bracing against a storm only she could feel. "We can't stay here," she said softly. "This is our fortress," Ethan replied. His voice was steel, but his eyes betrayed something else, fear sharpened into fury. "A fortress with open doors," she countered. Edward walked straight in. "Next time." Her voice faltered, her gaze finding his. "Next time we may not walk out." Ethan's hand tightened around the glass until it cracked. "Then next time I'll burn the world before I let him take you." Upstairs, Adrian sat on the edge of his bed, his head bowed, his shirt unbuttoned, to reveal bruises mottling his chest. Amara stood before him, dabbing antiseptic onto a cut across his brow. "You don't flinch," Adrian murmured, watching her. "I've seen worse," she replied gently. but never on someone who matters this much. His throat tightened. Amara. She met his gaze, steady, unwavering. Please don't push me away. Last night proved it. Whatever comes, I'm already part of this. He exhaled slowly, as if surrendering to the truth he'd fought so long. Then promise me one thing. If they come again, if Edward tries to take you fight, please don't give him the satisfaction of breaking me by breaking you. Her hands stilled, trembling slightly. I promise, she whispered. The promise was tested too soon. By afternoon, the tower was under tighter guard. Yet when Amara went to fetch documents from a nearby clinic, insisting she could travel unnoticed, she never returned. Hours passed. The sun bled into twilight. Then a message arrived, slipped under the tower's front doors, in another ivory envelope. Ethan tore it open, and Ayla and Adrian were at his side. The letter inside was brief, merciless. We have her. One empire for one life. Midnight. Harrington Docks. Adrian's hand trembled, the page crumpling in his grip. His eyes darkened, storm gray, turning to ash. He took her. Ayla's breath caught her hands, covering her mouth. No. Ethan's voice was low, lethal. Then tonight, we end this. Adrian paced like a caged predator in his study, his control unraveling. For years he had lived in silence, swallowing shadows. Now the silence burned him alive. She trusted me, he muttered. I let her go. I should have. This isn't your fault, Ayla said firmly. Edward planned this. He wanted to rip the heart out of you. Adrian slammed his fist against the desk, wood splintering under the blow. Then he succeeded. No, Ethan interrupted, stepping forward. His voice was sharp, but beneath it was brotherly fire. He hasn't. She's alive, and as long as she's alive, we fight. Adrian's chest heaved, eyes glistening with something dangerously close to despair. Then slowly he nodded. Then we fight. Midnight draped the Harrington Docks in darkness, the water black and restless beneath the skeletal cranes. Shipping containers loomed like silent tombs, their shadows stretching long. Ethan and Adrian arrived, flanked by guards, but Edward's men had already claimed the night. Figures in black lined the pier, rifles gleaming under the dim lights. At the center stood Edward Walker. His silver hair caught the moonlight, his smile sharp as a blade. Beside him, Amara knelt, bound. Her mouth gagged, but her eyes fierce even in captivity. Adrian's breath shattered. He surged forward, only to be restrained by Ethan's grip. Patience, Ethan whispered. We need her alive. Edward's voice rang out smooth, mocking. My dear nephews, you came. How touching. You bring your empire with you. You want the company? Ethan called back. It's not yours to take. Edward's smile deepened. Oh, but it is. You were children when it was built. I carved its foundations while you played with shadows. It should have been mine all along. His gaze flicked to Amara, cruel satisfaction gleaming. But it takes loss to make you understand. Ethan stepped forward, his presence magnetic, his voice cutting through the night. You think bloodlines give you the right to rule. Legacy isn't built on betrayal. It's built on sacrifice. And tonight, we'll show you what true heirs look like. Edward's laugh echoed against the steel containers. Then prove it. Trade your empire for her life. Adrian's voice thundered before Ethan could answer. Take me instead. The words tore through the air, raw and unguarded. You want a walker? You want blood? Then spill mine. But let her go. Amara's muffled cry broke against the gag, her eyes wide with desperate protest. For a heartbeat, Edward seemed almost entertained. How noble. How predictable. He raised his hand, and one of his men pressed a gun to Amara's temple. Adrian froze, every muscle in his body, straining against the impossible choice. Hidden among the shadows of the dock, Ayla gripped the small pistol Ethan had pressed into her palm. He had begged her to stay behind. She hadn't listened. Now crouched behind a container, she watched the scene unfold, her heart hammering. She saw Amara's trembling shoulders, Adrian's breaking gaze, Ethan's clenched fists, and she knew waiting meant losing. With steady hands, she aimed. One shot rang out, slicing through the night. The gunman holding Amara crumpled to the ground. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked, men shouted, shadows scattered. Now Ethan roared, charging forward. The pier exploded into battle. Bullets ricocheted off steel, and water churned with splashes of bodies falling. Ethan fought like fire. Every strike was precise and merciless. He tore through Edward's men with a fury sharpened by love and vengeance. Adrian sprinted toward Amara, his chest burning, his world narrowing to the sight of her bound form. He cut her free, ripping the gag from her lips. "Adrian!" She gasped, her hands clutching his face. "I'm here!" he rasped, pulling her into his arms, even as bullets screamed around them. "I'll never let you go again." They clung to each other in the storm for a heartbeat, love stronger than fear, before Adrian shielded her and dragged her toward cover. Nearby, Ayla fired again, her courage blazing, covering Ethan as he advanced. He reached her side, his arms circling her protectively, even as he reloaded a weapon seized from a fallen man. "You shouldn't be here," he growled. Her eyes flashed. "And let you die without me. Never." Their gazes locked, fury, devotion, fire, and they were no longer just lovers in that moment. They were warriors. Edward remained calm at the center of the chaos, a wolf in the storm. He watched as his men fell, as his nephews fought with a ferocity he hadn't anticipated. Then with a sharp whistle, he signaled retreat. His men began to pull back, melting into the shadows. But before disappearing, Edward called out, his voice carrying like a curse. "You think you've won tonight? You haven't. The traitor is still among you, and when he strikes again, it won't be for ransom. It will be for the kill." His laughter echoed as he vanished into the dark, leaving only silence and the stench of gunpowder. The night quieted, broken only by the lapping of water and the ragged breaths of the survivors. Adrian held Amara close, his hand cradling her face, as if to prove she was real. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, voice raw. "You never will," she breathed. "Not while I can fight." He kissed her, then fiercely, desperately, a vow carved in the heat of survival. Nearby, Ethan pulled Ayla into his arms, his forehead pressed to hers. "You disobeyed me," he murmured. "Then punish me," she whispered back, her lips trembling into a smile. "But know this, Ethan. I'd rather face bullets at your side than live safely without you." His chest heaved, his composure shattered, and he kissed her as though the world had ended and begun again all at once. The Harrington docks bore the scars of fire and blood, but the walkers had won a battle. Amara was safe. The sisters stood unbroken. Love had burned brighter than fear, yet Edward's words lingered in the night air. "The traitor is still among you." And as the four stood together, hand in hand, they knew survival was no longer enough. To end this war, they would need to root out betrayal, not just outside their walls, but within. Morning light spilled across Walker Tower, yet it carried no warmth. The four had returned from the docks, bruised, bloodied, and alive, but the echo of Edward's words haunted them. "The traitor is still among you." Ethan stood in the boardroom. His suit rumpled, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Before him, the board gathered executives, advisors, men and women who had served Walker Global for decades. Their whispers crackled like fire. Adrian sat at the far end, his gaze sharp as a blade. Ayla and Amara stood behind them, silent witnesses, strength woven into their presence. Ethan's voice cut through the murmurs. Last night, Edward proved he has an ally inside these walls. Someone is feeding him our moves, our weaknesses. Someone with Walker blood on their hands. The room stilled. Adrian rose slowly, holding up a document Ayla had uncovered, bank transfers buried beneath false names, encrypted but cracked open by her investigative skill. Money trails don't lie, Adrian said coldly. And these lead not to a stranger, but someone who sat at this table. Gasps broke the silence. All eyes turned as Adrian cast the file across the polished wood. The name glared back in bold black letters. Samuel Price, Chief Financial Officer, the man their father trusted for 30 years. Samuel's face paled, his composure crumbling. You don't understand. Edward promised, he said. Ethan growled. You sold our lives for profit. His voice, thunder and ice. You gave him the keys to our house, blood, and future. Samuel's mouth opened, but security dragged him from the room before he could speak again. His pleas echoed down the hall like a dirge. And though the traitor was unmasked, Edward still walked free. That night, Ethan and Adrian stood together on the tower's rooftop, the city sprawling beneath them like a battlefield. He won't stop, Adrian said, his voice low. Not until he's broken us completely. Then we stop him, Ethan replied. Not with whispers, not with defense, with truth. Adrian frowned. Truth. Ethan's gaze was unflinching. We expose him, publicly. Every crime, every betrayal, every drop of blood he spilled. We drag Edward Walker into the light. Ayla stepped forward from the shadows, her journalist's fire gleaming. And I'll be the one to write it. If we control the narrative, Edward can't twist it. The world will see him for what he is. Amara's hand found Adrian's, her voice calm but resolute. And I'll testify. About the poison, about the kidnapping, about every wound he carved. Evidence and truth together. That's how we end this. Ethan looked at them, his brother, the women who had become their hearts, and nodded. Then tomorrow, the empire will see who truly deserves its throne. The trial was chaos wrapped in marble halls. Journalists swarmed the steps, cameras flashing like lightning as the Walker brothers entered, flanked by Ayla and Amara. Edward sat at the defense table, his silver hair gleaming, his smile sharp. He looked less like a criminal and more like a monarch waiting to reclaim his crown. But the evidence was merciless. Ayla presented her findings: financial leaks, encrypted messages, and photographs from the docks. Her voice never faltered, even when Edward's lawyers sneered and the judge leaned in with narrowed eyes. Amara followed her medical testimony, clear and damning. The compound in Adrian's blood is not commercially available. It exists only in laboratories controlled by Harrington interests funneled through Edward's accounts. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Then Adrian spoke, his voice steady, despite the weight of every gaze. Edward Walker is not only a traitor to this company. He is a traitor to our blood. He sought to kill me, to kill my brother, to destroy everything our family built for greed. Finally, Ethan rose. His presence filled the courtroom like thunder. Edward believes love is weakness, that loyalty is a price to be bought. But tonight you see the truth. Love is the only empire worth building, and betrayal has no place in it. The gavel struck. The verdict rang out. Guilty. Edward's smile finally cracked as guards closed in. His eyes found his nephews burning with venom. You think this is a victory? Empires fall. Families rot. And love, his voice was bitter, broken. Love always dies. But as he was dragged away, Ethan's hand found Ayla's, Adrian's, found Amara's. and the world saw that Edward's prophecy was already wrong. Months later, the Walker estate bloomed under a canopy of white roses. Lanterns swayed in the evening breeze, casting golden light over rows of gathered guests. It was not just a wedding. It was a declaration. Ethan stood in a tailored black suit, his eyes softened by devotion, as Ayla walked toward him, her gown flowing like moonlight. Adrian waited beside him, his gaze never leaving Amara, who glowed in emerald silk, her smile trembling with joy. Twin aisles met at the altar, 4 paths converging into one. Vows were exchanged, not as whispers, but as promises carved into eternity. Ethan's voice broke only once, as he said, "I would burn every empire to keep you safe." Ayla's tears glistened as she replied, "And I would walk through fire to stand beside you." Adrian's hand trembled as he placed the ring on Amara's finger. "You gave me life when I thought mine was ending. Now I give you every moment left in me." Amara's lips curved, her voice soft but steady. "And I'll spend every moment proving you are more than shadows. You are my light." When the officiant declared them bound, the garden erupted in applause. When Ethan kissed Ayla and Adrian kissed Amara, it was not just love. It was a victory. Weeks later, laughter filled the tower instead of silence. Amara clutched a small envelope in her trembling hands, tears streaming as she whispered, "Twins. We're having twins." Adrian nearly dropped the glass. He held his composure, shattering. He caught her in his arms, burying his face in her hair, his laughter breaking into joy. "We're going to be parents, twice over." Across the estate, Ayla laughed through her tears as she showed Ethan the sonogram photo. His gray eyes widened, then softened, his body trembling as he pulled her close. Destiny really does favor the brave. In that moment, legacy was no longer about stock markets or skyscrapers. It was about love, multiplying, about futures, written not in contracts, but in the hearts of children yet unborn. The Walker name no longer carried chains. It had laughter, light, and the promise of generations who would inherit not power, but love. Richard and Eleanor watched quietly from the shadows at a celebration in the estate gardens. Their faces, once cold with disapproval, softened as their grandsons embraced their wives, and as daughters-in-law they once called outsiders. They were now family. Richard raised his glass, his voice rough. "To love, the only empire worth building." And for once, even Eleanor smiled. As night fell, lanterns swayed in the garden, where roses bloomed. Ethan, Adrian, Ayla, and Amara stood together, their hands intertwined, their laughter mingling with the music. They had survived betrayal, poison bullets, and fire. They had turned scandal into vows, weakness into strength, shadows into light. Their story was not just theirs. It was for everyone who had ever been told love was weakness, who had ever been forced to choose between duty and heart. And so, dear reader, if their journey touched you, carry it forward. Believe in love that defies fear, in loyalty, stronger than blood, in futures written not by legacy, but by courage. Because love is not the end of the story. It is always the beginning. Will you dare to fight for yours?